Today marks the beginning of our journey through Holy Week, which is the most important week of the entire church year. This week, we recall the events of Jesus' passion, death, and resurrection. Today, we will listen to the passion narrative according to Matthew, and on Friday, we'll listen to the passion narrative according to John. These narratives contain our faith, the very core of God's love for us, so unconditional that he would empty himself, take the form of a slave, and accept death, even death on a cross. For those of you who read my letter, you also know that the words of these passion narratives can be twisted in such a way to cause hatred and oppression. In Jesus' culture, way back 2,000 years ago, society depended on this whole idea of honor and shame. Jesus, who was a single carpenter's son, without any children, had absolutely no status, and therefore very little honor whatsoever. But during his time ministering in Galilee, what he said and what he did, especially his miracles, allowed him to gain status, to gain honor. And because of that, this simple man from Galilee was seen to be the Messiah, and more so, acknowledged as the Son of God. The elites of his time, those people with power, saw that as a threat to their society. They looked at Jesus and saw in him someone who threatened the entire fabric of society. So they wanted to break him and do it publicly. They wanted him to be shamed. And this was their intent when he came to Jerusalem. They confronted him on a number of occasions with questions to trap him. But every time they tried to trap him, he turned the trap on them. He was able to avoid the shame, and by doing so, the shame fell upon their shoulders. And so these elites became more and more shamed. They lost honor, they lost status, and so they struck out at Jesus. What they did was arrest him, publicly try him, humiliate him, and then kill him by hanging him on a tree. The passion narratives, however, make clear that the crucifixion of Jesus did not shame him. He did not lose status. In fact, he gained status. Pilate's wife declared him to be a righteous man. Judas throws back the money that he had been given, declaring him to be innocent. And the soldiers at the crucifixion declared him to be the Son of God. His status grew. Now the gospel writers, Matthew, Luke, Mark, John, they also lived in that society of status and honor and shame. So when they wrote their gospel, they made sure that Jesus was the great hero, as he was. But in order to make him the great hero, they needed a great villain. And so the elites, the powerful, the leaders of his day, especially the Jewish leaders, and all the Jewish people, ended up being painted with a single stroke as villains. There was no shades of gray. It was all black and white. The more they raised up Jesus' status, the more they felt they needed to shame the people who had him crucified. And so the scriptures that we hear this week have phrases in them that are often used to cause prejudice and hatred to our Jewish sisters and brothers. In today's gospel, we hear the phrase, "His blood be upon us and upon our children." Now, the truth is, Jesus' blood is upon us and upon our children as a way to salvation. But the way this was phrased and the way it has been read throughout 2,000 years has been toward the Jews as the ones who brought about his death, and therefore vengeance should be upon them and upon their descendants, their children. So for hundreds of years, they have been the subject of oppression and last century, the Holocaust. As we read these stories, we do not wish to read them that way. We wish to hear in them the love of God poured out on the cross. We need to remember the culture of the time so that we don't fall into the trap of thinking of the Jewish people as being the ones who caused Jesus' death. It was God's love poured out that led him to offer his life. It was not the Jews or even the Romans who caused his death. It was his love for us that poured out his life, his blood upon the cross. So, we do not want to add to the pain and suffering of the past. We do not want to use these words to cause harm to our Jewish sisters and brothers. And in particular this year, when it has been so ugly in our country, with hundreds of incidents of vandalism, graffiti, and threats toward our Jewish sisters and brothers to their synagogues, cemeteries, and community centers, we want to have hearts filled with love and generosity as we remember the unconditional love of Christ. We do not do so by bringing out any kind of hatred upon those people who are our brothers and sisters in faith. So, as people of faith during this Holy Week, we wish to bring about a great joy of love without any cause for harm. Listen then to the Passion narratives, understanding that they were written for a particular time, a particular place, with a particular cultural insight. Don't let them be used in the wrong way. Our culture should be a culture of absolute love, forgiveness, so that the blood of Christ can be poured out upon all of us for salvation. So may you have a truly holy week. God bless as we listen now to the story of our salvation.